Hello, it's great to be with you all today. My name is Paul Chapman and I'm the CIO at Box, and this is the next installment of a series of interviews that we're conducting with senior technology leaders on the topic of work unleashed. I'm super pleased to have with me today Em Fackler, who is the CIO at the IRC, and Rebecca Gang, Senior Technical Advisor at the IRC. If you would have told me a few months ago that the new champion of accelerating your digital agenda would be COVID-19, I would have thought you were crazy. But today our business models, daily operations, technology architectures, and even our company's cultures are all being disrupted simultaneously. Over the past few months, I've met with literally hundreds of technology leaders and had interactions with many people, and a few things have emerged. Major technology projects are having their budgets cut, paused, or canceled. The remote workforce is here to stay, and post-COVID, our workforce will be more virtual, collaborative, and tech-savvy, and might I add, more discerning than ever before. Cloud migration efforts are on hyperdrive. Companies were either already on digital platforms or now on burning platforms that need to move. Cloud is the only way forward to be agile, to be resilient, and to be able to connect employees, customers around the world. Every business process is now a target for automation. And as I mentioned, COVID has accelerated the digital agenda and digital transformation efforts across almost all industries. So with that backdrop, I would like to say a warm welcome to Em and Rebecca and thank them for joining us today. So let's start with a little bit of a background. Em, maybe you could share a little bit of background on your role at the IRC. And for those that may not know, share what the IRC is. And certainly I've always enjoyed listening to your stories and the great work that the IRC is doing. So Em, maybe you can start us off.
Thank you so much, Paul. And on behalf of the IRC, we really want to thank Box for the tremendous partnership that you've been providing for us over the years, but particularly over the last few months. For the folks that are listening that are not aware of the IRC's background or what we do, we're one of the largest humanitarian aid groups in the world. We are exclusively focused on supporting refugees, individuals that have been unfortunately found themselves in need of leaving their home. Our tagline is from harm to home. So many of those individuals have experienced, whether it be significant issues around climate change that have forced them to leave their homes, or more often political turmoil where they have found themselves maybe on the wrong side of whoever is leading. These individuals often leave in the middle of the night just with the clothing on their backs, trying to do what all of us want to do as human beings, keep their families safe. We work in over 40 different countries providing programs for refugees. And we actually provide support in the United States in the form of resettlement centers. So for refugees that are approved by the US government to come into the US, we help them establish themselves here. Technology, to be honest, was not at the top of the agenda of the IRC until a few years ago, when as we kept growing, when the need for supporting refugees kept growing, unfortunately, just given so many issues, there was a realization by David Miliband, our CEO, that technology could really be used to help improve both our own staff's ability to respond, and as you'll hear from Rebecca in just a moment, the work that really in support of our beneficiaries, the refugees who need to be supported during this time period. My role is to provide overall technology for all of those groups. So with that, let me pass it to Rebecca.
Thanks, Em. So I'm Rebecca. I'm a Senior Technical Advisor for Protection and Rule of Law within the IRC's Violence Prevention and Response Unit. We really work on issues of making sure that people's human rights are protected wherever they may find themselves in situations of crisis. We do programming. The IRC does programming across a bunch of outcome areas, mainly health, education, safety, my team, governance, economic recovery, and well-being. This is really designed to support people across the arc of crisis, from really surviving those emergency moments to recovering to regaining control of their lives. But this is a moment we find ourselves in, isn't it? Between not only COVID, but really importantly, Black Lives Matter, we are in a moment in which we can no longer shy away from reflecting on how we deliver these programs. We, as an organization and as an industry, have been striving for many years to step away from what we call direct delivery modalities, where we come in and say, don't worry, we're the experts, we know what you need, stand aside, let us help you. And yet we haven't really gotten far enough down this road. This is a whole discussion that we call localization, which is something we've been wrestling to figure it out and just haven't gotten there. But this for me is what makes Signpost really different. Is I believe the Signpost project really centers our clients and our users, puts them in the driving seat of this journey in a really intentional and deliberate way. We put responsive, high quality, up-to-date, client-driven information in people's hands in a way that they can carry and store for use whenever it suits them, however it suits them. And we believe that changes the balance of power. I think COVID-19 gave us a really important opportunity to look at, from our perspectives in these very privileged places of safety and well-being, that information is power. Information is power for people affected by crisis. And we've all had a taste of this now, as we've heard different messaging around what's going on and how do I keep my family safe and where do I go and what do I do and how do I get food and all that stuff. That's what it's like every day in the lives of people who are affected by displacement and crisis and marginalization. So
awesome. Well, thanks. Oh, sorry. Keep it. Sorry, before we finish.
I just wanted to finish up by saying access to this quality contextualized information and the ability to ask and have your own questions answered as an individual and have those questions answered with honesty, sensitivity, in plain language, safeguards or restores one's agency, dignity, and sense of control. And I really think that's central to what we're trying to do.
That's awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate that. The mission and the work that the IRC does is just incredible, and thank you very much for the great work that you do. Em, you've been at the IRC for almost 5 years, and you came from the private sector into NGO, which I'm sure has some interesting transition to it. What was the technology strategy at IRC been over the last 3 to 5 years? You mentioned, a focus on technology, but can you share maybe what kind of technology services you've invested in to achieve sort of the mission that you're on?
Absolutely. So they take two different forms, and I'm going to start actually with the form that Rebecca and the work that she's doing a tremendous job doing, is really looking at tools and support for beneficiaries themselves. So how can we take technology? What Rebecca is describing is a mobile app that refugees actually are able to access with their own cell phones, one of the few things often that they have when they arrive in a foreign land, and they actually share information among themselves. So there's technology, I call it a tool, or there's a term in the humanitarian space about providing technology for programming, for development, and also for the beneficiaries. So that's one aspect of the work, and that is very, very important. The other aspect is the IRC has over 14,000 employees worldwide. Over 90% of them are out working in the field programs, locations that often do not have great connectivity, hard to be able to access, on the Somalian border, in Yemen, in Bangladesh, working in camps with Rohingya refugees. And what we need to do from a technology side is provide solutions to those folks. One of the first things that we invested in when I first joined was really around global connectivity. The good news, bad news of coming into an organization like the IRC is that we didn't have in place the historical legacy systems. They had not invested in technology. So I had the luxury of going cloud first. But to go cloud first, I had to start with actually ensuring our employees could have access to that cloud. So the first thing we did was put in the global connectivity to ensure that individuals, to the best degree that we could have attached to Wi-Fi in their office, homes, etc., to be able to access the cloud solutions. We focused on putting in collaborative tools. Box was an early tool that we included to ensure that our folks throughout the globe could access and share files and information. We have also since moved in the last 12 months. We are completely Teams-based, and we use Teams for all of our chatting, conversation. As of a metric that I looked at most recently, about 3 weeks ago, over 78% of our employees worldwide had used Teams to converse with someone else in the organization since March 15th. That may not sound impressive to some folks listening to this, but remember, we are in some of the places where connectivity in and of itself can be challenging. So invested in connectivity, collaboration tools, and we're actually just now rolling out an ERP system, a system that will allow us to manage the back office needs of the organization, finance, managing grants, and also supply chain. With the camps and programs that we put together, we need to buy, hundreds of thousands of blankets, ensuring that those are done in an appropriate fashion and tracked. Believe it or not, even today in some locations, we're tracking all of that manually. That's not how you want to run an organization of our size, working in many of the places that we work. So we have our most exciting opportunity, knocking on wood here, is we will be going live on a field site for our ERP solution on July 1st in our first field site. This one happens to be in the US, but we're doing it 100% remotely, meaning that all of the go live is occurring remotely, all of the training occurred remotely, all support is occurring remotely, and the staff we're deploying to are also all remote. So just an example of some of the things we put in place.
Well, I'm sure you're all learning a tremendous amount of new ways to do things, some things better than previous as well. I mean, the sort of forced shift to remote work is forcing us to figure out things that are actually better than previously. And to your point, we're seeing a significant increase in the usage of all forms of communication exchange services, whether that's Teams or Slack or Zoom, WebEx, or the Box. We've seen significant increase in the usage of our platform, as you can imagine, because we're purpose built to help organizations work from anywhere. And certainly the IRC, as you mentioned, it's a lot of your employees work in some of the most dangerous and unsettled regions in the world. And I'm sure you deal with a lot of regulation and complexity as well, which I'll touch on in a minute, because I think security and risk are definitely something that are top of mind for a lot of organizations, is accelerate, rolling out new services and so on. Rebecca, so, signposts I think is fascinating, but I'm not an expert, but what I've heard is I think it's a tremendous value that you're bringing to the IRC. So how does the IRC leverage technology like signposts to empower groups of people that are at an even higher risk during things like massive disruption in the pandemic?
Yeah, thanks for that. This is something that we've thought a lot about, but need to keep challenging ourselves and really see this moment as an opportunity to do so. We know that generally speaking, access to technology is greater for men and for urban populations, as well as wealthier people with access to higher education. Age and language are also big factors in securing access to the power that comes with accessing technology. Signpost achieves greater scale through the use of technology, which is super exciting to be able to support 1.5 million people with access to information versus 300 people through a traditional dissemination session. But we believe this greater scale should always be paired with targeted approaches to reach segments of the population that face greater risk of rights violations, as you say, like exclusion from services, exposure to misinformation, and risk of experiencing violence that flows from those things. In El Salvador, I want to give you a couple of examples. In El Salvador, we've set up physical access points in women and girls safe spaces, as well as safe spaces for LGBTI populations, where people can use Wi-Fi and tablets where they might not have those themselves to access signpost information, but they're also there supported by information counselors who are there to help them navigate those information resources safely and meaningfully to understand how those pertain to their own situations. We also know that women are more likely to share or borrow mobile phones and are less likely to feel safe interacting online. And we've worked with our women's protection and empowerment teams to develop guidance for our online moderators or information counselors unsafe communication protocols for women facing violence in the home. This is a particularly important one for us. And we've established processes for immediately addressing any instances of hate speech or harassment on our platforms. We have very clear guidance around that because we know that puts people at risk. There's this continuum between online speech and offline violence. We want to really nip that in the bud. And we also want these spaces to be safe for the development of community so that people can support each other, not just us supporting them. We've also incorporated use of established technology tools. We've really benefited from the private sector in this regard because the humanitarian aid industry sadly is behind on some of these protocols around inclusive design, universal design. So we've taken a lot of those materials on and we've developed content designed with more accessible fonts, text sizes, color contrast, a lot of audio visual reliance, icons, universal icons and stuff like that is now really a core element of our design. We're also exploring use of machine learning and AI to help us speak to people in minority languages where translation support isn't always available. Finally, we recruit our moderators from the displaced populations we seek to target. This is really important for us as an income generating opportunity, but more importantly, it supports our ability to recognize colloquial and often coded references to rights violations that people don't necessarily feel comfortable talking about or may not have equivalents in more dominant languages. Also really to support a feeling of empathy and understanding in the way that we communicate, which we believe is critical to the element of trust.
Yeah,
which leads
no,
people to
I agree. You know, one of the things we've been talking a lot about is that, you know, these are leadership moments outside of technology. Technology is an enabler to certain outcomes, but leading with empathy, making sure that our employees and their families are safe and well taken care of, and you know the work will take care of itself. And I know certainly that's been top of mind for a lot of leaders. You know, so one of the things I touched on a moment ago, and Rebecca, I'm going to come back to that machine learning comment that you made earlier, sort of that digital labor, AI, introducing that into the environment. But one of the things I touched on earlier, Em, was around security and risk. You know, Box works with some of the most risk-averse organizations all over the world. You know, we're renowned for, you know, the strength in our security posture and helping organizations to protect their most valuable content and, you know, providing chain of custody and so on over that content and control. You know, COVID-19, unfortunately, you know, responding to a crisis doesn't mean security threats or compliance risks are any less pervasive. And one of the unintended consequences of accelerated working remotely now is the increase in security breaches or security attacks. We've certainly seen from the data that we gather operationally, and others have confirmed that they've seen a significant uptick in sort of malware attacks and phishing attacks. And you know, I know a lot of companies are driving sort of speed over perfection as they try to accelerate their digital agenda here. But at the same time, security needs to be built into whatever it is you're sort of rolling out from a technology standpoint. So I'm just interested from a IRC perspective, how you think about the security and risk posture of the IRC as you, again, work around the world in some of the most sort of vulnerable and dangerous you know, geographic locations.
I'm so sorry, I muted myself.
That's right, and it's all good.
Yeah, sorry about that. So I wanted to go back to the question you asked me earlier because it ties to this, which is some of the differences I've seen moving from the for-profit sector. I was with Johnson & Johnson before I joined the IRC, and some of the differences. And it's security where some of those differences have absolutely been. Because at Johnson & Johnson, we cared about security a great deal, but the security we were focused on was protecting information, intellectual property rights, and financial assets of J&J. At the IRC, the protection has to be around lives, and that puts a whole different perspective on the issue. You know, we're working in politically volatile space. Not everyone, we acknowledge, shares our perspective on the importance of the humanitarian work that we do. And so we have an obligation to absolutely protect the individuals, the refugees that we work with, Last year, we worked with over 30 million refugees. And again, given that the bulk of the reason that they have left is political, you know, Rebecca's comment about trying to help give that power back to the individuals who know what they need most. For us, it's also protecting their identity, protecting where they are. And so it's really a different aspect than what I found from the corporate. It puts, I have been much more focused on it than I mean, I always was, but much more focused on it than the IRC had seen before. One of the first positions I hired when I joined the IRC was a Chief Information Security Officer. Pretty standard role in the corporate world. We never had one at the IRC before. And, you know, I will share, I literally just before I got on this phone call, got an update on a situation. I won't provide any details on it, but we have an employee who's been abducted. And in that process, being able to work with and support that individual, providing the best support that we can, again, is a whole different set of issues. So that's pretty dramatic, and I don't mean to, you know, raise concerns, but those are the issues that we have to deal with. And information and the ability to connect with individuals and to be able to help work through the dynamics of this particular situation takes care, takes experience, takes information, and takes protection. And it's been interesting for me, my role at the IRC has actually expanded, and I'm now also responsible more broadly for operations, of which safety and security in its physical way is also a component. The last comment I would make about some of these issues is that, again, private companies have been incredibly supportive through COVID-19 as we've dealt with this. And as employees have gone home, given the sensitivity on the information that we work with, we've had partners, Sophos is one of the ones that's come forward, and they've given us free security software for all of our employees' home computers. So, I mean, which was tremendous knowing the work that we do, then we've just started rolling that out. So we put programs in place to help all of our employees understand what information they should be protecting, things that they need to be sensitive to, you know, given all of us now, including me, is working from a home office, also known as my dining room table.
Yeah, I've heard of people working in closets, dining room tables, backyards, front yards, all sorts of different locations. The CIO of Sophos is a good friend of mine, so we'll do a quick shout out to Tony Young for the work they're doing to support you guys over there. Yes, thanks, Tony. So Rebecca, one of the things you touched on a moment ago, which is, I think, is as we start to look forward, we are seeing, and I mentioned this at the top here, that there's a lot of companies now are moving to obviously accelerate digital capabilities. You know, no more wet signatures is a simple example. This is where all those things sort of come home to get you if you haven't moved already. I've heard of a lot of organizations saying that, you know, the cost of the disruption is greater than it would have been for the investment in some of the technologies that they're now having to accelerate. But one of the things I'm seeing as we look forward is machine learning, more predictive, more, call it sort of digital labor. You earlier mentioned around transcriptions, translations, things like that. I'm interested to know how do you expect these types of changes to impact sort of signpost strategy going forward, and what do you think, you know, this type of technology will continue, how this type of technology will continue to play out and evolve at the IRC?
Thanks for that. I mean, specifically around machine learning and AI, we don't know yet. I wish I could tell you that we had received the funding that we need to explore these kinds of partnerships with organizations like Translators Without Borders. You know, an organization we really want to work with to explore some of this stuff and test how we could go further with technology, but we're not there yet in terms of what our key donors are ready to support. But we'll keep looking. I think I don't think we'll ever go back to the before time. Yeah. Those many eons ago, hundreds of years ago before COVID struck. Certainly, I think the aid industry will forever be changed. I think our remote methodologies and use of technology we've catalyzed those to ensure continuity of our programs across all of our outcome areas. That's not going to go away, and it's not going to go away mainly for reasons of scale, but also I think for reasons of quality and the acknowledgement that we have to meet our clients where they are, and in so many places that's online. Tech is increasingly being used to support administrative tasks, which I think is really important, associated with services like case management, which will always and forever require human resources. We don't want to take the humans away, but human time is expensive, and we want to save that human time for the tasks that need that kind of specialist support. And if we can use tech to remove some of that time-consuming, non-specialist needing admin stuff, leaving the humans to do the human thing, that would be amazing. And we're really looking more and more at how to do that.
That's well said. I've heard, not heard, we do this ourselves at Box. I have this saying that anything that takes less than a second for a human being to think about could be automated. It doesn't mean it has been, but could be. And as you look across your supply chains and the way your business processes run, there are many candidates for automation. And generally what we find is that this doesn't displace in any shape or form the human beings that are required to run the business. It actually just elevates their time to work on higher value activities, and some of the base level, standard, mundane, sort of repeatable stuff that we do is taken away from us as it's automated. And that's actually a very positive thing as well. So moving on to the next question here. So, and actually, you also mentioned, the sort of the new normal, which is definitely business is unusual. It definitely isn't going to go back to the way things were before. As I mentioned before, we're definitely going to have much more of a discerning workforce. The workplace environment is going to be different, more remote work. We've proven, that we can transition to remote work now. We're learning there are a lot of things that are better, and there are some things that we are missing from the sort of workplace environment. Unfortunately, campuses and office space was generally built for anti-social distancing. I don't think that was a conscious decision. It was just they're designed to bring people together in close proximity to work together. And so, the future office space and changes that happen there will certainly, I think, impact some things as well. So Em, as we think about the future, how do you expect these changes to affect how the IRC works longer term? And what do you believe are the opportunities that we will see from the shift in working remotely?
Yeah, it's certainly something that we're thinking a lot about as an organization. We want to put as many, the highest percentage of every dollar we receive, whether it be a small donation or a grant or anything, we want to really put that to work for beneficiaries, which means that we want to keep our own internal overhead costs down. For all of us, office space is a significant component of that overhead space. Yeah. And so we're starting to think differently about for our headquarter teams. So those are administrative team members, to have them, how can we better use remote work? And remote work can be, where I am, even though IRC is headquartered in New York City, I'm currently sheltering in place in Northern California. But it can also mean that we can put more of our staff in the global South, where where most of our work is being done. And we want to make use of the, tremendous talent and skills that we have throughout the globe. Certainly we have a resettlement center in New York City right near Broadway on 39th Street. So we need to support them there as well. But the bulk of the people that we support are in the global South today. So we're thinking about how much office space do we need? How would we think about things differently? And instead, can we use more shared service support? Do it out of Nairobi, do it out of Amman, Jordan, do it out of Bangladesh. How can we get those individuals even closer to the folks doing work? One of the aspects of the IRC that I'm really proud of is that I told you about those 14,000 employees. Well, we have 14,000 an additional what we call incentive workers. If we are in a refugee camp and we can figure out work for a refugee to do, we do it. Because we all know as human beings, we do better when we get up in the morning with a reason, things to be done, a reason to be there. And so, this is slightly, may seem a non sequitur from technology, but from my view, it's not. Technology allows us to actually put work in the hands of the people that are closest to the programming work that needs to be done, and figure out, again, through the connectivity, how we can spend as many dollars of our dollars as possible directly with the work and where the work is actually being done. So things such as doing the transition more towards the global south, having our workforce more remote, not spending the larger money on office space or items. The other thing that we're doing that is quite different is, the IRC, like many organizations of our type, we spend a huge amount of money on travel. We hold conferences. I've held the first 2 ever IT employee conferences that the IRC had ever held. And the most recent one was in Tanzania. And those are expensive. I mean, those cost more money than probably any of us wish to acknowledge, just in airfare, et cetera, to pull together. We've proven that we don't need to do that. One of the things we've done that we had never tried before is that we now have weekly Zoom huddles where all employees are welcome to join. We have the time zone difference, so that comes in a challenge. We record them all just as you're doing here. But we regularly now are getting 1,400 employees every week to hear the work that we're doing, get feedback on some of the programs and activities that are going on. And the feedback from our employees has been amazing. And that was the only investment, was buying larger simultaneous licenses for Zoom, and then being able to make that happen. That's very, very different. We had never done it before, and we've now done it 15 consecutive weeks in a row.
Yeah, that's something that I'm hearing echoing from many organizations, including Box. I think the participation, the engagement during these large meetings or all hands meetings, whatever they might be, has gone way up. In fact, I think even just engagement and participation in general has gone up now that we're sort of all working off of the sort of what I would call equal platform. We don't have half a room with people and half the people dialing in and half the people on video and so on. And the engagement has gone way up. And it's quite interesting because I was talking to someone earlier just about this, that you mentioned Tanzania and travel and getting there and getting people there and the time and the time zone and so on. And outside of expense and so on, there's just a lot of just additional stress that these types of sort of gatherings put on people. I've heard of many technology conferences are seeing a significant increase in attendance because they're now virtual. You don't get to miss out on any of the content. There's no overbookings of certain sessions and things like that.
Exactly.
And so definitely seeing some positive. In fact, we moved BoxWorks this year to be a virtual event. And so I think that these are certainly things that are proving out to be positive. And I sort of joked earlier that it's a little bit like time travel. I was engaged with some folks in Europe the other morning, the East Coast in midday and California in the evening, and I didn't have to leave my home, which was nice. I get to sleep in my own bed as well. Previously, that would have been planes, trains, automobiles, jet lag in hotel rooms. So as we sort of start to wrap up here, maybe one last question, Em. What should your peers, other technology leaders, whether NGOs, CIOs, or other heads of technology at other enterprise, be thinking about right now? And what advice would you give them? Certainly, I've seen a lot of organizations really focus on resiliency of operations, resiliency of systems, resiliency of process, because without an effective vaccine, or we expect that this is going to hit us in waves, and this is not about short-term investments, it's long-term investments, and making sure we're investing to be resilient for the long term. But interested in any advice you would give just as we wrap up here.
No, a couple things come to my mind, and resiliency was absolutely at the top of the list. When a site, when a network is down, we're completely down now. I mean, dramatically, which much more than we had been in the past. So, work that technology companies can do to ensure that all of us can keep all of our work up and going all the time and have that resiliency is key. For me, also, I'm always going to care about security. As I gave you the sort of unfortunate examples of some of the security issues that we deal with, again, it takes to me a whole new light when you're talking about individuals' lives. That's more important to me even than money. So making sure that we ensure the security is in place and collectively we work together to solve some of those issues. The last point I'd leave you with is, we need to start thinking differently, I think, about how the humanitarian sector, other nonprofit groups partner even more effectively with technology groups. Again, Box has been wonderful to the IRC and we're incredibly appreciative, but we are entering a very challenging time as the globe, and starting to try to work together in different ways to help support some of the most vulnerable in the world. I mean, I echo Rebecca's view that this is a moment, that's a moment I don't want to lose. But how can we work better to help support those that need us most? And so I don't have all the answers by any means of that. And I'm just not asking for a check or asking for free software, hardware, although we always love those. But just how do we think differently about meeting the needs of refugees through signposts and other technical solutions that we could provide together?
Yeah, I think it's one thing I've always said about the technology community in general, or technology leadership in general, is that, there's no blueprint for this. We're all learning together. We're all trying to figure this out. We don't have the crystal ball. There's a series of firsts that we're going through. There's no rear view mirror data that we can look at. And I've been just totally humbled with the amount of willingness for technology leaders like yourself to share perspectives, and hopefully we'll all come out of this in a much better place. I did want to put you on the spot for one thing, if you don't mind, and that was you mentioned to me the other day when we were hanging out on a different call, that your mother had just turned 100 and you had a Zoom birthday for your mom. Maybe you could share a little bit about that.
I'd be happy to. Yeah, it's been quite the event. Not all, more and more individuals throughout the globe are able to live longer and longer. And my mother's, been blessed to have 100 wonderful years. So, but because of COVID-19, because she's, although a pretty extroverted individual, prefers having smaller groups these days, one of the things that we've done this time is that I reached out for individuals, friends throughout her life, to send birthday cards. My goal was to receive over 100 birthday cards for her. I have to tell you, latest count, we're at 204. So it's been amazing. But then we also use Zoom to do a birthday celebration for her. And I know lots of other folks have done this in different degrees, but my mother has become a fanatic on Zoom. The idea that she can see her family members around the globe and that she could talk to them, she just loves it. She keeps saying, this is just amazing. And it's been wonderful. I have a sibling who unfortunately is quite ill, and it just lit my mother's eyes up to be able to see her and talk to her in person, given that she couldn't travel. So I appreciate the call out. Happy birthday to my mother, Virginia Morgan, 100 wonderful years young.
Awesome. That's it's great to hear of a 100-year-old digital transient. That's awesome. Well, with that, I'll start wrapping up. This has been a great conversation, and feedback is really appreciative. The insights and perspectives shared have been just awesome, and I really want to thank you both for your valuable time today. I did just want to wrap by saying, leading with empathy must be our #1 priority, as we already touched on. No one is working 9 to 5 anymore. The workday is flattening. The structure of the workday is blurring. We need to continue to lead with empathy and focus on the human element, making sure, we continue to make sure our people and their families are healthy and well, and the work will take care of itself. So with that, this concludes our latest episode of Work Unleashed. Stay well and healthy, everyone.